there's so many mysteries to it. For anybody to pretend that they have all the answers to something as perplexing as Egypt,
I think
nuts.
this is an area where I often get criticized, but I think when we look at a civilization and what it is and what it's achieving and why it's so special, when we look at our civilization today, we are fantastic at technology. We are brilliant at science. We can make the best possible machines. And we're a society that is built around production and consumption, and a society in which people define themselves in terms of what they own, what they possess, and what they produce. And it becomes a very materialistic society, a society that's focused on material things, where we define ourselves by our material possessions. Ancient Egypt had a totally different focus. Yeah, they were great at making material things, but that was secondary. Their main thing was, what are we here for? Why are we living this life? What happens to us when we die? They investigated that mystery more deeply than any other culture that I know of, and they were doing so right from the beginning of records.
And they were documenting this journey to the afterlife.
Absolutely.
In hieroglyphs. And it's like, what were you documenting? Like, how do you know? Like, what were you trying? How did everyone agree on this particular myth or this story?
Unless there was some experience being brought to bear in it. It's one of the things that we point out in season 2 is that the ancient Egyptian notion of a leap to the sky after death, to the Milky Way, of a journey along the Milky Way, of encountering challenges and dangers and risks there, monsters that would block your path, gates that you had to know the password to get through. That idea is found all over the world. The path of souls. It's found all over the Americas. That.
What do you think that they're trying to say?
Well, I think first of all, it's evidence of a remote common origin of this idea. It's when it's found amongst cultures all around the world that apparently had no contact with one another and are often separated by hundreds or thousands of years. The same idea is found about what happens to us after death. The only reasonable explanation I can come up with is that they've all inherited this idea and then developed it in their own ways from a remote common source. And that's one of the main reasons that I'm curious about the possibility of a lost civilization, that these spiritual ideas are found all around the world. And they involve the journey of the soul after death. And a leap to the heavens. And sometimes it's called an underworld, but really it's set in the sky. And this journey that takes place, where you are judged on what you've done with your life. This is something else that we avoid in the world today, is taking responsibility for our own lives. The ancient Egyptians required you to take responsibility for your life. And if you did not do so, the outcome after death would not be good. You had to celebrate the gift of life. You had to realize the incredible gift that you had been given. And one of the opportunities of that gift is the opportunity to accumulate wisdom. And that's one of the things, hopefully, that we all do as we get older, is get a bit more wisdom and a bit more understanding. But in the case of ancient Egypt, that idea is developed over 3,000 years, and it's essentially the same at the beginning as it is at the end. That the soul, that death is not the end. This is the conclusion of a society that put its best minds at work for 3,000 years on this problem. The death is not the end. We may think it is. Scientists may tell us it is. But when a scientist says death is the end, there's nothing more, we're just physical bodies, and when the light goes out, it goes out forever, that's actually not a scientific fact. That's not something that's been investigated or can be investigated.
Consciousness itself is so confusing. Just consciousness, just like, what is it? Why are we conscious? What is it local, or are we tuning into consciousness? And when you die, where's that go? Where's that energy go? Is a soul a real thing? Like, what is the essence of life? What is the essence of human life and human consciousness? Those are perplexing questions.
They're very perplexing questions, which actually are of great significance to every one of us. Yeah, I mean, suppose death just is the end, then that's a way not to have to take too much responsibility for our lives, for the impact that we've had on others, for the pain that we may have caused, or for the joy that we may have caused. If death's the end, there's no up or downside to that, whatever we do. But from the ancient Egyptian point of view, death's not the end, and you have been given the precious gift of life. What did you do with it? And there are moral aspects to that question. There's these 42 assessors, they're called the negative assessors, who ask the soul of the deceased questions about what they did in life. And those are all moral questions. They bear some relationship actually to the Ten Commandments. But there's another question, which is called the weighing of words. And that question is, what did you do with the gift we gave you? We gave you the gift of the human life. We gave you the gift of the opportunity to love or to hate. At your choice. We gave you the gift to live in a human body, to have this incredible consciousness, to be able to integrate all kinds of information from all kinds of spheres. What did you do with it? Did you leave the world a better place or a worse place than when you came into it? Did you hurt and damage and cause pain to others consistently out of wicked intent, not accidentally but deliberately causing pain? And there are human beings who do that. For the ancient Egyptians, that kind of behavior meant an introduction to Amit, the eater of the dead. And Amit is displayed in the judgment scene. He's a creature, part hyena, part lion, and he sits there, and certain souls do not go on. Their journey ends, and it ends because of the choices they made during life and because they never took responsibility for what they did.
Well, it kind of makes sense. A natural selection of the souls.
Everything we're talking about is so full of mystery. It's just fascinating, especially the farther back we go.
That's what I love about the past, is the mystery that's there. And that's another thing that I regret about some archaeologists, is that their mission seems to be to drain all mystery out of the past, to suck it dry like some kind of vampire, sucking the blood out of the past, and to reduce it to a series of numbers that appear to be scientific. I think that's most unfortunate. The past is deeply mysterious. The whole story of life on Earth is deeply mysterious. I mean, we were talking about the timeline of human beings, but if you go back to the formation of the Earth itself, if I've got the figures right, it's about 4.5 billion years ago that the Earth supposedly formed. It was then incredibly hot and inhospitable to life for the next several 100 million years. But it was actually Francis Crick who pointed out something odd, that within 100 million years of the Earth being cool enough to support life, there's bacterial life all over the planet. And Crick wrote a book called Life Itself that was published in 1981. And he suggested that life had been brought here by a process of panspermia. Now, that's an idea that's around in circulation, that comets may carry bacteria which can seed life on planets. But Crick actually in Life Itself was talking about directed panspermia. He envisaged this is Crick, not me. He envisaged an alien civilization far away across the galaxy, which faced extinction. Perhaps a supernova was going to go off in the neighborhood. They were highly advanced. Their first thought might have been, let's get ourselves off the planet and go and populate some other planet. But the distances of interstellar space were so great. So their second thought was, let's preserve our DNA. Let's put bacteria, genetically engineered bacteria, into cryogenic chambers and fire them off into the universe in all directions. And bottom line of Crick's theory in Life Itself is one of those cryogenic containers containing bacterial life from another solar system crashed into the early Earth, and that's why life began so suddenly here on Earth.
If we as a human civilization continue, I think that is a one way to create backups of us elsewhere in the universe, given the space, is to do a life gun and shoot it everywhere.
Yeah.
And then it's just plants.
Yes.
And you kind of hope that whatever is the magic that makes up human consciousness, and if that magic is already there in the initial DNA of the bacteria,
the potential for that magic is there.
The potential is there.
And evolutionary forces will work upon it in different ways in different environments. But the potential is there. Yes, it's something that we would do. If we were facing a complete extinction of life on planet Earth, a major global effort would be made to preserve it somehow. And that might well include firing off cryogenic chambers into the universe and hoping that some of them would land somewhere hospitable.
And as you were mentioning, there's just so many interesting mysteries along the way here. For example, I mean, it's like I think like 3 billion years, it was single cell organisms.
Yeah.
So it seems like life was pretty good for single cell organisms, that there's no need for multicellularity, that like for animals, for any of this kind of stuff. So why is that? It seems like you could adapt much better if you're a more complicated organism. It took a really long time to take that leap. Is it because it's really hard to do? And what was the forcing function to do that kind of leap? And the same, I mean, for us to be selfish and self-obsessed, for us humans, like what was the magic leap to Homo sapiens from the other hominids? And why did Homo sapiens win out against Neanderthals and the other competitors? Why are they not around anymore? So those are all fascinating mysteries, and it feels like the more we propose sort of radical ideas about our past and take it seriously and explore, the more we'll be able to sort of figure out that puzzle that leads all the way back to Homo sapiens and maybe all the way back to the origin of life on Earth.
Yeah. I think that Homo sapiens is the tail end of a very long, deep series of mysteries that goes back right to the beginning of life on this planet, and probably long before, actually, because this planet is part of the universe, and God knows what else is out there in the universe.
So you mentioned that the pyramids and some of the other amazing things that humans have built was the result of us humans struggling with our mortality.
That's the ultimate goal. That seems to me what's at the heart of many pyramids around the world, is that they're connected in one way or another to the notion of death, and to the notion of the exploration of the afterlife. And this is, of course, the fundamental mystery that all human beings face. We may wish to ignore it. We may wish to pretend that it's not going to happen, but we are, of course, all mortal. Every one of us, all 8 billion or however many of us that are on the planet right now, we're all going to face death sooner or later. And the question is, what happens? And there are a few cultures that really intensely, deeply studied that mystery. We are not one of them. The general view of science, I think, is that we're accidents of evolution. When we die, the light blinks out. There's no more of us. There's no such thing as the soul. But that's not a proven point. There's no experiment that proves that's the case. We know we die, but we don't know whether there's such a thing as a soul or not.
Yeah, it's the great mystery.
It's a great mystery that we all share, and those cultures that have investigated it, and ancient Egypt is the best example, have investigated it thoroughly and map out the journey that we make after death. But that notion of a journey after death, and of hazards and challenges along the way, and ultimately of a judgment, that notion is found right around the world, and it even manifests into the 3 monotheistic faiths that are still present in the world today.
Well, you're one such human. And you said you contemplate your own death.
Yeah.
Are you afraid of it?
No. I'm not afraid of death at all. I'm curious about death. I think it could be very interesting. I think it's the beginning of the next great adventure. So I don't fear it. And I would like to live as long as my body is healthy enough to make living worthwhile. But I don't fear death. What I do fear is pain. I do fear the humiliation that old age and the collapse of the faculties can bring. I do fear the cancers that can strike us down and riddle us with pain and agony. That I fear very, very much indeed. But death is going to come to all of us. I accept it. It's going to come to me. And I'm not going to say I'm looking forward to it, but when it happens, I'm going to approach it, I hope, with a sense of curiosity and a sense of adventure, that there's something beyond this life. It isn't heaven, it isn't hell, but there's something. The soul goes on. I think reincarnation is a very plausible idea. Again, modern science would reject that. But there's the excellent work of Ian Stevenson, Children Who Remember Past Lives, who found that children up to the age of 7 often have memories of past lives. And in cultures where memories of past lives are discouraged, they tend not to express that much. But in cultures where memories of past lives are encouraged, like India, they do express it. And he found several subjects, children under the age of 7 in India, who were able to remember specific details of a past life, and he was able to go to the place where that past life unfolded and validate those details. So if consciousness is the basis of everything, if it's the essence of everything, and consciousness benefits in some way from being incarnated in physical form, then reincarnation makes a lot of sense. All the investment that the universe has put into creating this home for life may have a much bigger purpose than just accident.
What a beautiful mystery this whole thing is.
Yeah, we are immersed in mystery. We live in the midst of mystery. We're surrounded by mystery. And if we pretend otherwise, we're deluding ourselves.
And Graham, thank you so much for inspiring the world to explore that mystery. Thank you for talking today.
Thank you, Lex. It's been a pleasure.
As you were mentioning, there's just so many interesting mysteries along the way here. For example, I mean, it's like, I think like 3 billion years, it was single-cell organisms.
Yeah.
So it seems like life was pretty good for single-cell organisms, that there was no need for multicellularity, that like for animals, for any of this kind of stuff. So why is that? It seems like you could adapt much better if you're a more complicated organism. It took a really long time to take that leap. Is it because it's really hard to do? And what was the forcing function to do that kind of leap? And the same, I mean, for us to be selfish and self-obsessed, for us humans, like what was the magic leap to Homo sapiens from the other hominids? And why did Homo sapiens win out against Neanderthals and the other competitors? Why are they not around anymore? So those are all fascinating mysteries, and it feels like the more we propose sort of radical ideas about our past and take it seriously and explore, the more we'll be able to sort of figure out that puzzle that leads all the way back to Homo sapiens and maybe all the way back to the origin of life on Earth.
Yeah. I think that Homo sapiens is the tail end of a very long, deep series of mysteries that goes back right to the beginning of life on this planet, and probably long before, actually, because this planet is part of the universe, and God knows what else is out there in the universe.
Why do you think Homo sapiens evolved? What was the magic thing? There's a bunch of theories about fire leading to meat, to cooking, which can fuel the brain. That's one. The other is like social interaction. We're able to use our imagination to construct ideas and share those ideas and tell great stories. And that is somehow an evolutionary advantage. Do you have any like favorite conceptions of?
It's interesting. There's no doubt that anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals coexisted in Europe for at least 10,000 years, probably more than that. And yet one of the popular views is that anatomically modern humans wiped out the Neanderthals, that we killed them off. But at the same time, we were interbreeding with the Neanderthals. In a sense, the Neanderthals are not gone. They're still within us today. We are part Neanderthal. There's another theory that I've read about. There is some evidence that Neanderthals were cannibals, that there was ritual cannibalism took place amongst Neanderthals, and particularly the eating of human brains. And this can cause kuru, which can kill off whole populations. That's another suggestion of why the Neanderthals died out. There's lots of possibilities that have been put forward. Maybe we just outcompeted them. Maybe anatomically modern humans had some brain connections that they didn't have, even though the Neanderthal brain was bigger than the brain of anatomically modern human beings. As the old saying goes, size isn't everything. Maybe we just had a more compact, more efficient brain. The fact of the matter is that Neanderthals and Denisovans did not survive the rise of Homo sapiens.
For our discussion, though, what is interesting is all the hominids seem to be explorers.
Yes.
They spread. I mean, I didn't know this.
The fact that Homo erectus was all over the planet more than 1 million years ago is testament to that. And I do think that exploration urge is fundamental to humanity. And I would like to say that's what I think I'm doing. I'm exercising my urge to explore the past in my own way, making my own path and defining my own route.
Let's start with a big foundational idea that you have about human history, that there was an advanced Ice Age civilization that came before and perhaps seeded what people now call the six cradles of civilization: Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, Andes, and Mesoamerica. So let's talk about this idea that you have. Can you, at the highest possible level, describe it?
It would be better to describe it as a foundational sense of puzzlement and incompleteness in the story that we are taught about our past, which envisages more or less, there have been a few ups and downs, but more or less straightforward evolutionary progress. We start out as hunter-foragers, then we become agriculturalists. The hunter-forager phase could go back hundreds of thousands of years. I mean, this is where it's also important to mention that anatomically modern humans were not the only humans. We had Neanderthals from, 400,000 years ago to about 40,000 years ago. They were certainly human because anatomically modern humans interbred with them, and we carry Neanderthal genes. There were the Denisovans, maybe 300,000 to perhaps even as recently as 30,000 years ago. And again, interbreeding took place. They're obviously a human species. So, we've got this background of humans who didn't look quite like us. And then we have anatomically modern humans. And I think the earliest anatomically modern human skeletal remains are from Jebel Hood in Morocco and date to about 310,000 years ago. So the question is, what were our ancestors doing after that? And I think we can include the Neanderthals and the Denisovans in that general picture. And why did it take so long? This is one of the puzzles, one of the questions that bother me. Why did it take so long when we have creatures who are physically identical to us? We cannot actually weigh and measure their brains, but from the work that's been done on the crania, it looks like they had the same brains that we do, with the same wiring. So if we've been around for 300,000 plus years at least, and if ultimately in our future was the process to create civilization or civilizations, why didn't it happen sooner? Why did it take so long? Why was it such a long time? Even the story of anatomically modern humans has kept on changing. I remember a time when it was said that there hadn't been anatomically modern humans before 50,000 years ago. And then it became 196,000 years ago with the findings in Ethiopia, and then 310,000 years ago. There's a lot of missing pieces in the puzzle there. But the big question for me in that timeline is, why didn't we do it sooner? Why did it take so long? Why did we wait until after 12,000 years ago, really after 10,000 years ago, to start seeing the beginnings, what are selected as the beginnings of civilization in places like Turkey, for example? And then there's a relatively slow process of adopting agriculture, and by 6,000 years ago, we see ancient Sumer emerging as a civilization. And we're then in the pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt as well, 6,000 years ago, beginning to see definite signs of what will become the dynastic civilization of Egypt about 5,000 years ago. And interestingly, round about the same time, you have the Indus Valley civilization popping up out of nowhere. And by the way, the Indus Valley civilization was a lost civilization until the 1920s, when railway workers accidentally stumbled across some ruins. I've been to Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and these are extraordinarily beautifully centrally planned cities. Clearly they're the work of an already sophisticated civilization. One of the things that strikes me about the Indus Valley civilization is that we find a steatite seal of an individual seated in a recognizable yoga posture. And that seal is 5,000 years old. And the yoga posture is Mula Bandhasana, which involves a real contortion of the ankles and twisting the feet back. It's an advanced yoga posture. So there it is 5,000 years ago. And that then raises the question, well, how long did yoga take to get to that place when it was already so advanced 5,000 years ago? What's the background to this? China, the Yellow River civilization. Again, it's around about the same period, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. You get these first signs of something happening. So it's very odd that all around the world we have this sudden upsurge of civilization about 6,000 years ago, preceded by what seems like a natural evolutionary process that would lead to a civilization, and yet certain ideas being carried down and manifested and expressed in many of these different civilizations. I just find that whole idea very puzzling and very disturbing, especially when I look at this radical break that takes place in not just the human story, but the story of all life on Earth, which was the last great cataclysm that the Earth went through, which was the Younger Dryas event. It was an extinction level event. That's when all the great megafauna of the Ice Age went extinct. It's after that. It's after that event that we start seeing this, what are taken to be the beginnings of the first gradual steps towards civilization. We come out of the Upper Paleolithic, as it's defined, the old end of the Old Stone Age, and into the Neolithic, and that's when the wheels are supposedly set in motion to start civilization rolling. But what happened before that, and why did that suddenly happen then? And I can't help feeling, and I've felt this for a very long while, that there are major missing pieces in our story. It's often said that I'm claiming to have proved that there was an advanced lost civilization in the Ice Age, and I am not claiming to have proved that. That is a hypothesis that I am putting forward to answer some of the questions that I have about prehistory, and I think it's worthwhile to inquire into those possibilities, because the Younger Dryas event was a massive global cataclysm, whatever caused it, and it's strange that just after it we start seeing these first signs.
So the current understanding in mainstream archaeology is that after the Younger Dryas is when the civilizations popped up in different places of the globe with a lot of similarities, but they popped up independently.
Yeah, independently and by coincidence. And by coincidence, those big civilizations that we all remember as the first civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley Civilization, China, they all pop up at pretty much the same time. That is the mainstream view. Yeah.
And they don't just pop up; they kind of build up gradually. First, there's some settlements.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And then there's different dynamics of how they build up, and the role of agriculture in that is also non-obvious, but it's just there's first a kind of settlement, a stabilization of where the people are living, then they start using agriculture, then they start getting urban centers and that kind of stuff.
It seems like an entirely reasonable argument. Everything about that makes sense. There is no doubt that you're seeing evolutionary progress, social evolution taking place in those thousands of years before Sumer emerges.
So your idea is that the Sphinx and maybe some aspects of the pyramid were much earlier.
Yes.
And why that's important is, in that case, it would be evidence of some transfer of technology.
Yes.
From a much older civilization. Yeah. The idea is that during the Younger Dryas, most of that civilization was either destroyed or damaged, and they desperately scattered across the globe.
Seeking refuge
and telling stories of maybe the importance of the stars, their knowledge about the stars, and their knowledge about building and knowledge about navigation.
Mm-hmm. That's roughly the idea. So it's interesting that the ancient Egyptians have a notion of an epoch that they call Zep Tepe, which is the first time. It means the first time. This is when the gods walked the earth. This is when 7 sages brought wisdom to ancient Egypt. And that is seen as the origin of ancient Egyptian civilization. There are king lists by the ancient Egyptians themselves. There are king lists that go back way beyond the first dynasty, go back 30,000 years into the past in ancient Egypt, considered to be entirely mythical by Egyptologists, but nevertheless, it's interesting that there's that reference to remote time. Now, what you also have in Egypt are what might almost be described as secret societies. The followers of Horus are one of those, specifically tasked with bringing forward the knowledge from the first time into later periods. The souls of Pe and Neken are another one of these mysterious secret society groups who are possessors of knowledge that they transmit to the future. And what I'm broadly suggesting is that those survivors of the Younger Dryas cataclysm who settled in Giza may have been relatively small in number. It's interesting that they are referred to in the Edfu building text as 7 sages, because that repeats again and again. It's also in Mesopotamia. It's 7 sages, 7 Apkallu, who come out of the waters of the Persian Gulf and teach people all the skills of agriculture and of architecture and of astronomy. It's found all around the world that there was a relatively small number of people who took refuge in Giza, who benefited from the survival skills of the hunter-foragers who lived at Giza at that time, and who also passed on their knowledge to those hunter-foragers. But it was not knowledge that was ready to be put into shape at that time. And that knowledge was then preserved and kept and handled within very secretive groups that passed it down over thousands of years. And finally, it bursts into full form in the 4th dynasty in ancient Egypt. And the notion that knowledge might be transferred over thousands of years shouldn't be absurd. We know, for example, in the case of ancient Israel, it goes back to the time of Abraham, which is pretty much, I think, around 2000 BC, and knowledge has been preserved from that time right up to the present day. So if you can preserve knowledge for 4,000 years, you can probably preserve it for 8. I spent much of the 90s and the late 1980s investigating this issue of a lost civilization. I wrote a series of books about it. But by 2002, when I published a book called Underworld, which was the most massive and most heavy book that I've ever written, because I was writing very defensively at the time. By the time I finished that book, my wife Santha and I spent 7 years scuba diving all around the world, looking for structures underwater, often led by local fishermen or local divers to anomalies that they'd seen underwater. By the time that book was finished, I thought, actually, I've done this story. I've walked the walk. I really don't have much more to say about it. And I turned in another direction, and I wrote a book called Supernatural: Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, recently retitled Visionary. And that was fundamentally about the role of psychedelics in the evolution of human culture. And I didn't think that I would go back to the lost civilization issue. But Göbekli Tepe in Turkey kept on forcing itself upon me. The more and more discoveries there, the 11,600-year date from Enclosure D, which has the 2 largest megalithic pillars. And I reached a point where I realized I have to get back in the water, and I have to investigate this again. And Göbekli Tepe was a game changer, but I think it's a game changer for everything, because Göbekli Tepe, the extraordinary nature of it. We're looking at a major megalithic site, which is at least 5,500 years older than, say, Gigantia in Malta, which was previously considered to be the oldest megalithic site in the world. And this led, of course, to a huge amount of interest and attention, both from the Turkish government, who see the tourism potential of having the world's oldest megalithic site, and from archaeologists. And this, in turn, has led to exploration and excavation throughout the region. And what they're finding throughout that whole region around Göbekli Tepe, and going down into Syria and further down into the Jordan Valley as far as Jericho, and even across a bit of the Mediterranean into Cyprus, is what Turkish archaeologists are now calling the Tas Tepeler civilization. They're calling it a civilization, the Stone Hills civilization, with very definite identifying characteristics: semi-subterranean circular structures, the use of T-shaped megalithic pillars, sometimes not anywhere near as big as those at Göbekli Tepe. It's clear that Göbekli Tepe now was not the beginning of this process. It was actually, in a way, the end of this process. It was the summation of everything that Stone Hills civilization had achieved. But what is becoming clear is that this is a period before the foundation of Göbekli Tepe. As far as we know, that date of 11,600 years ago is the oldest date for Göbekli Tepe. But of course, there's a lot of Göbekli Tepe still underground. So we can't say for sure that that's the oldest, but it's the oldest so far excavated. What we're seeing is that in that whole region around there something was in motion, and it began to go into motion round about the beginning of the Younger Dryas, and this is where these two dates are really important. The Younger Dryas, I'll round the figures off, begins around 12,800 years ago, and it ends around 11,600 years ago. So Göbekli Tepe's construction date, if it is 11,600 years ago, if they don't find older materials, marks the end of the Younger Dryas. But the beginning of the Younger Dryas, we're already seeing the stirrings of the kind of culture that manifests in full form at Göbekli Tepe. And after the construction of Göbekli Tepe, in fact, even during the construction of Göbekli Tepe, we see agriculture beginning to be adopted. The people who created Göbekli Tepe were all hunter-foragers at the beginning. But by the time Göbekli Tepe was finished, and it was definitely, deliberately finished, closed off, closed down, deliberately buried, covered with earth, covered with rubble, and then topped off with a hill, which is why Göbekli Tepe is called what it is. Göbekli Tepe means pot-bellied hill, or the hill of the navel. For a long time, Göbekli Tepe was thought to be just a hill that looked a bit like a potbelly.
Can you say how it was discovered? I think this is one of the most fascinating things on Earth, period. So maybe can you say what it is and how it was discovered?
Well, Göbekli Tepe is, first of all, the oldest fully elaborated megalithic site that we know of anywhere in the world. It doesn't mean that older ones won't be found, but it is the oldest so far found. The part of the site that's been excavated, which is a tiny percentage of the whole site, we do know. My first visit to Göbekli Tepe was in 2013, and Dr. Klaus Schmidt, the late Dr. Klaus Schmidt, who died a year later, was very generous to me and showed me around the site for over a period of 3 days. And he explained to me that they've already used ground-penetrating radar on the site, and they know that there's much more Göbekli Tepe still underground. So anything is possible in terms of the dating of Göbekli Tepe. But what we have at the moment is a series of almost circular, but not quite circular enclosures, which are walled with relatively small stones, and then inside them you have pairs of megalithic pillars. And the archetypal part of that site is enclosure D, which contains the two largest upright megaliths, about 18 feet tall and reckoned to weigh somewhere in the range of 20 tons, if I have my memory correct. They're substantial, hefty pieces of stone. It isn't some kind of extraordinary feat to create a 20-foot tall or 20-ton megalith, nor is it an extraordinary feat to move it. There's nothing magical or really weird about that. Human beings can do that and always have. Besides, the quarry for the megaliths is right there. It's within 200 meters of the main enclosures. So that's not a mystery. But the mystery is why suddenly this new form of architecture, this massive megalithic pillars appear. And the pillars, one of the things that interests me about the pillars is their alignment, and there is good work that's been done which suggests that enclosure D aligns to the rising of the star Sirius, and the rising points of the star Sirius appear to be mapped by the other enclosures, which are all oriented in slightly different directions. It was the work entirely of hunter-foragers, but by the time Göbekli Tepe was completed, agriculture was being introduced and was taking place there. Now, you asked how Göbekli Tepe was found. The answer to that is that there was a survey of that pot-bellied hill in the 1960s by some American archaeologists, and they were absolutely looking for Stone Age material, for material from the Paleolithic, and they had found some Paleolithic flints, upper Paleolithic flints around there, so it looked like a good place to look. But then they noticed, sticking out of the side of the hill, some very finely cut stone, bits of very large and very finely cut stone. And looking at that, the workmanship was so good that those archaeologists were confident that it had nothing to do with the Stone Age. And they thought they were looking at perhaps some Byzantine remains. And they abandoned the site and never looked at it further. And it wasn't until the German Archaeological Institute got involved, and particularly Klaus Schmidt, who I think was a genius, had real insight into this, and started to dig at Göbekli Tepe, that they realized what they'd found, that they'd found potentially the oldest megalithic site in the world. And they'd found it at a place where agriculture, according to the established historical timeline, that's where agriculture, at any rate in Europe and Western Asia, begins. It begins in Anatolia, in Turkey, and then it gradually disseminates westward from there.
And yet the understanding is it was created by hunter-gatherers.
It was created by hunter-gatherers, yeah. There was no agriculture 11,600 years ago in Göbekli Tepe. But by the time Göbekli Tepe was decommissioned, and I use that word deliberately, was closed down and buried, agriculture was all around it. And this was agriculture of people who knew how to cultivate plants.
Do we have an understanding when it was turned into if I could say, a time capsule? So protected by forming a mound around it. Is it around that similar time?
It stood from roughly 11,600 years ago to about 10,400 years ago, to about 8,400 BC. So around 1,200 years, it was there, and it continued to be elaborated as a site. And while it was being elaborated as a site, we see agriculture, I'm going to use the word, being introduced. There'd been no sign of it before, and suddenly it's there. And to me, that's another of the mysteries about Göbekli Tepe. And then with the new work that's being done, we realize that it's part of a much wider phenomenon, which spreads across an enormous distance. The puzzling thing is that after Göbekli Tepe, there almost seems to be a decline. Things fall down again, and then we enter this long, slow process of the Neolithic, thousands of years, gradual developments until we come to ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia. But agriculture has taken a firm root by then. Actually, one of the things, I'll just say this in passing, when I talk about a lost civilization introducing ideas to people, I'm often accused of stealing credit from the indigenous people who had those ideas in the first place. So I do find it slightly hypocritical that archaeology fully accepts that the idea of agriculture was introduced to Western Europe from Turkey, and that Western Europeans didn't invent agriculture. It was absolutely introduced by Anatolian farmers who traveled west. So the notion of dissemination of ideas perhaps shouldn't be so annoying to archaeologists as it is.